pretty clear. And wherever I go, people basically can never, like if you go to SFN or some big conference, and the day after the conference, of the posters that you saw, what percentage of them do you remember what the point was? I mean, so low. So this is something I think we should all be spending more time on. I want to encourage all of you to help each other with your science communication entities, papers, grants, posters, whatever, talks. And there's some chance that 5 or 10% of you should take a huge interest in this and maybe even professionally be helping people like the way I am. And so there's a little advertisement at the beginning of the talk. I have 5 or 6 editors and graphic designers helping me to help other people get their materials together. And if you think that you might be good at editing, please, I'm always hiring new subcontractors. If you want to do some freelancing, send me an email to one of these email addresses. One is more professional, one is shorter. And then let's return to the problem at a personal level for you. Besides just the community not figuring things out, which this is part of why Conrad publishes papers like, could a neuroscientist understand a microprocessor? But at a personal level, if you can't convince reviewers of your papers and grants of the importance of your work, and if you can't make them understand clearly the meaning of your work, then you're not going to get your papers published, you're not going to get your grants, and your career is not going to advance. It's a problem that you face, existentially in your career, and that's really what this talk is about: is helping you solve this problem that you have of, you are the world's expert in what you're doing, which means everyone else knows less about it. You have to get it to them, not only to make the world better, but to advance your career and have your work appreciated. So here's the next poll question, if you don't mind, Madineh.
Sure. Yeah, and so by the way, update on the last one, largely 0 to 20% or 20 to 40%. Okay, let's make the next poll visible. Okay, let's see, coming in. Is the problem that I intend to address in this talk clear and important to you? We have mostly yeses. We have, yep, 95% yeses.
Okay.
Yay.
Okay, so I intentionally made it very simple. So now that you understand what the talk is about, what the problem is of the talk, now I feel like I'm allowed to proceed. Okay, so we're going to start with actually something that's related to grants rather than papers. We'll get to papers later, since that's nominally the main focus. So okay, we're going to have to imagine it's a long time ago. Specifically, it's England. It's 932 AD, and there is a funding agency called Her Majesty's Research Funding Council for the Trades, and the pay line is only 8%. Only 8% of grants get funded. And the Queen is in charge of what gets funded. So in this scenario, in this hypothetical, you have to pretend like you are the Queen of England back then. It's a little bit of a stretch for some of you. And you're going to judge which of the following 2 grants you are going to fund. You'll see they have similarities and differences. Okay, so here's the first grant put forth by a blacksmith named Blacksmith Jones is the principal investigator on this first one. And here's this, and I'm not going to read it out loud. I'm going to let you read it. Okay. So as the Queen of England, think about how much you want your limited gold and silver to go towards funding this particular proposal. And so now we have another proposal, the second proposal, and that's from Blacksmith Smith. And it goes like this. Okay. I guess we can put up that second poll, Madineh.
Yep. The third poll is up as queen.
That's true. Third poll.
So we have 90% the second one. They found that more compelling.
What a great audience. Okay.
It works.
So everyone's getting it. And yes, Blacksmith Smith ended up getting the grant and the kingdom was saved. So you may have noticed the difference between the two grants. Here's a big problem in this in science communication that people have is you want to talk about, often people want to talk about their solution before they adequately set up the problem. And that risks audience disengagement and apathy, right? The queen doesn't care about that first one. The queen doesn't care about nails. The queen cares about the queendom. So the solution is just to take extra care to make sure that your audience understands the problem and cares about the problem. All right? They have to understand and care. Those are the two key things. Now, I almost should stop the talk right now, because then there'd be at least a good chance that a year later you'd be able to say, oh yeah, that talk was about the problem being that people start talking about their solution before talking about the problem, and just put time into that. So that really is the message. But now we're gonna drill into excruciating detail, which will risk clouding the message, but nonetheless, we have to have some detail. Okay, so again, before proceeding to your solution, right, you have to get across the problem, and you can consider that like consent, right? Like if you had all said no when I asked if you understood what the problem of this talk was, I would have had to step back and be, okay, let me re-describe this, because I'm not going to give you solutions until you understand the problem, because you can't possibly be interested in that. So that's okay. Now, I didn't invent the idea of talking about the problem before talking about the solution. So we're going to talk about just canonical story structure from time immemorial. So stories have a beginning, a middle, and an end. It's often referred to as setup, confrontation, and resolution. It's also the 3 acts of 3-act story structure. And in the paper that Conrad and I wrote that was oddly clickbaity for scientists, we call it context, content, and conclusion. I think because Conrad has like an alliteration fetish or something. So in all of these, the top row is the problem statement, and the bottom 2 rows are different aspects of the solution. And this talk is mostly about the problem statement. So we're kind of looking across the top row, but I want to show you how that fits into the whole story that has been the way that humans have communicated since even before there was written language. Now, there's a book called Writing Science by an author named Schimmel, where he breaks up the context into opening and challenge, thus giving it more texture, which is nice. I like this way of saying it. He calls the content part action, and he calls the conclusion part resolution. The reason I'm giving you all these different ways of saying the exact same thing is that as you're constructing your context, like in the first few sentences of an abstract, in the introduction section of the paper, you might have different descriptions of the problem statement, like setup, context, opening, challenge, that might jar you into thinking about it a different way and help you come up with the best way to contextualize what you're about to say. So it's nice to have lots of different ways of thinking about how to structure your problem statements. In the TV show South Park, the opening section is connected by a bunch of ands. This is what the writers of the TV show say they do in the writing room, and then at some point there's a but. Right? There's a bunch of background, and then but there's some challenge, which then leads to, therefore, an action has to be taken to address that challenge. So you can also kind of look at your conjunctions that you have in your, say, introduction section, or in the first paragraph of your aims page of your grant. A few different ways to. So you'll notice the top part is problem, and the bottom part is all solution. Okay, this is also true in music. It's not just writing. So music involves tension and then resolution, which is like problem and solution. So from very different genres. In the last Beethoven string quartet, tension is built up in this phrase that is translated as "must it be," and then it's resolved in "it must be." You can look this up and listen to this final movement of this quartet. It's quite nice. For those of you who are younger than me, which is basically everybody, it's also for club music, right? The moment in a dance track, after the momentum builds, the tension mounts, and then the beat drops, right? That's tension, 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 boom. So you're trying to create this. I realize it's a high bar, but you're trying to create this in all of your science communications. And the way that I put it into this Viking narrative is, and I'm just going to break it down for you real quick, just to put it in more concretely. That part's the problem. That part is the solution. For emotional tension, you can use, say, fear and then hope, right? There's a lot of, especially if it's something clinical, we should all be afraid that diseases are not going to be solved before we get them. So you might start with that if you have a clinical relevance, or some hard math problem that's preventing progress in a field. If we don't solve that, we're never going to solve this other stuff. There's also, for scientists, we're in it mostly because we're curious people. So you might want to inspire curiosity, like make your reader curious about something and then fulfill that. Now, I'm just going to apply this to an abstract from a paper a couple years ago to make it a little more concrete in a science example. And here we're going to take an abstract and sort of break it down into this line, the opening, challenge, action, resolution line of story structure. Again, they're all totally synonymous. So I'm going to let you read that. So that's an opening. That's to orient you to know what this is about. And then we bring in the challenge statement. And then action, and then resolution. And just to kind of drive that home. Now you may have noticed that I tried to make the opening and challenge sections of that abstract as widely readable as possible with just minimal there should be no words that really even a 10-year-old should be able to read that opening and kind of understand what it's about. I hope that's what we shoot for. And we do go around and ask people, as we'll discuss later. Okay, so then back to this other way of saying it that we do in our paper. We're going to be focusing on the context portion. This is just to show you where you're going to apply this in the paper that you're writing. So the abstract, you can see, so it's color-coded, right? So blue, white, red. So the blue is the context. The abstract starts with context, proceeds through content, and then a conclusion. We're going to go through this relatively quickly, but not too quickly so that it's not clear, hopefully. At the section scale of the paper, right, there's the entire introduction can be thought of as context. And so we spend so much time when we're doing papers on the first two sentences of the abstract and the entire introduction section. The results section usually requires less sort of sweaty refinement because it's more straightforward and concrete. And then that's the conclusion section of the paper. At the paragraph scale, and you can go through this in the 10 Simple Rules paper, we actually break down all the different ways in which these story structure elements go into the different elements of the paper at all the different scales. But we don't have time to go through this in great detail. I think Conrad gives the talk where he probably spends 20 minutes on this one slide. Okay, so now next we're going to focus on this aspect of the solution. All right, so again, driving this message home, you really want to make sure that your audience understands and cares about the problem. So let's focus on the making sure part and the audience part. All right, so this next section provides ways to make sure and to think about audience altogether. All right, so this is to come up with a kind of a metaphor that might work for this particular crowd. Communication, it's a feedback process just like motor control. So how so? Well, there's a current state, right? Like I don't know, let's say my hand is here and then there's a goal state, like I want to grab this glass, all right? And so I plan need 3 arms. I plan some action and maybe I miss it, okay? Now I assess, because there's some outcome. I assess that I've missed it, and then next time, I'm going to refine my action so that I achieve the goal state. That's good. So, okay, so this is motor control, right? I don't know if it's optimal motor control, but it's motor control. And all right, I forgot to press that. There you go. Right, you adjust your action to achieve your goal state. Now, we're going to apply this to the communication cycle because it's the same thing, right? You learn about your audience, know about your audience, and think about your audience. Importantly, your audience is not you. They are really far from you. You're the expert in what you're doing, and they are not. And you really have to channel for each element. And we're going to talk about the different kinds of audiences involved in reviewing your paper or in dealing with your paper. But your ability to really generate your own internal model of each of your audience members that are going to assess your paper or your grant in different ways, it's really important. And it might be maybe harder for some of you, because I mean, I presume that many of you are very good at math. And the subset of people who happen to be very good at math might not be the exact same subset of people who are really good at imagining what impact communications are going to have on other people, right? For example, politicians seem to be really good at understanding how to communicatively manipulate other people, but they don't seem that, as far as I can tell, they don't seem to be that good at math. So I think there's just a slight disconnect in those subpopulations of humans. And so it might take a little extra effort to really imagine what your drafts are how your drafts are going to affect others. Okay, so who are these audience members? And we're going to go through the different kinds of audience for your paper in a later slide. What does your audience care about, and what can they care about, right? The queen cares about her queendom not being destroyed. She doesn't really care about, the other stuff that the first blacksmith was talking about. And then what does your audience know and not know? You have to take them from where they are in knowledge to then move them to know more stuff so they can care about your problem. And this requires really thinking about these levels of the issue way more than I see most people doing as they are drafting their papers. Okay, so then for any communication, decide what effect you want to have on them. Like, so for example, for the journal editor, you just want them to send the paper out, right? For the reviewers, you want them to, approve your paper, accept your paper. So once you've decided what effect you want to have on your audience for the different communication elements, you then reverse engineer. You design your material to accomplish that effect on that particular audience, right? All makes sense. It's like, none of this is that earth-shattering. It's kind of like eating your vegetables. But here's the important part that people don't do enough of, is to empirically test naive viewers to determine how close you are to achieving the desired effect. So as I go around and give these talks, I ask, has anyone ever submitted an abstract to a journal without having tested the final version on some naive viewer? Everyone raises their hand, right? We've all done that, right? You're changing stuff, and you're like, oh, someone saw an earlier version and they thought it was sort of okay, and so we're sending this in. It's time where we don't want to get scooped. We're pushing it in. And then who knows what's going to happen when you send that in when you haven't tested it, right? It's kind of bizarre that we submit things that haven't been sort of communicatively tested the way we would do science. So you use these tests computer's shaking. We use these tests to refine the drafts, which looks a lot like something else you may be familiar with, right? You have a hypothesis, you do an experiment, you get some result, and you refine the hypothesis. Like in science, you would never just publish something, I hope, where you have no support whatsoever for your hypothesis. So like submitting a paper or a grant where you haven't tested the hypothesis, can a person understand and care about this document, right? If you've never even tested that on a naive person, then you're just submitting an untested hypothesis. Hopefully I'm speaking to the crowd here. Okay, so and the motor control metaphor is multi-scale. As you fail to grab glass properly, and then you get it right the next time, then your overall planning will improve. Your model of your own kinetics will improve, and you'll get better and better at your first draft being at least halfway there instead of, you know, a tenth of the way there. Okay, so then some mechanics. Here's how we do a pretty formal abstract clarity spot check, because, you know, the abstract is so important. It's I mean, obviously the title is also, but I want to kind of give you just some formalities for how we do this, just to show you how careful we are sometimes when we have time, which we try to make time for. Before I say this, so what we do is we actually, well, back when you could be in person with people, we would just go around the building with a printout of an abstract, title and abstract, and then just basically accost people in the hallway and say, hey, can you give me 2 minutes to read this abstract and tell me if it makes sense, tell me if it's good. And they would read it, and then we would ask them these 6 questions. If you want, I can send you, or I guess you can just, you know, screen grab this, but I'm happy to send you any of these materials later if you email me. Because we really want to know what, you know, all papers are reviewed live. All science reception, all science communication reception occurs live. Grants are reviewed live. What is happening in the person's mind as they're reviewing what you've written? If you just send an email and ask people to, you know, send you back comments, may be useful, but they're not actually giving you what was happening moment to moment. Where exactly you know, did they get lost? It's just better to do it live when you can. Okay, so as promised, the 3 audiences of papers. So the first audience is, of course, the journal editor. The journal editor is special, right? They're the gatekeeper. They decide whether they're going to send it out or not. Now, they have slightly different desires than the reviewers. The journal editor really cares about significance. It really cares that it's going to make a splash. They're less concerned about credibility, whether the results actually prove it. Now, of course, they're concerned about both. But the way that you speak to the journal editor is largely in the cover letter. In the cover letter, you get to communicate why what you've done is going to make a big difference in the field. You know, why the work matters, and the people who are going to review it, the reviewers, they don't really see the cover letter typically. So the cover letter is a place where you can speak directly to that particular, you know, audience, and you can focus on significance there. Now, in the paper itself, you need to focus more on credibility. Did you actually prove you know, what claim you're making for the paper? And then the third audience is who is ultimately going to read the paper after it's published, right? And so these different audiences might have different things that they know and that they don't know, and so that relates to the kind of language that you're going to use throughout. And let's see. So yeah, this leads to this next important word, people understanding the problem that you are laying out. In one way that people get lost is jargon. Jargon depends on the audience that you're speaking to. So, you know, the reviewer of your paper might, probably knows more technical words than the broader audience that you may be trying to reach after it's published. But the journal editor probably doesn't know as much of the jargon words that you might want to use. So you really want to be careful. So one time I gave this talk and a long time ago, and afterwards I asked, you know, did I use any jargon that kind of made something not clear? And someone said, well, what's a pay line? I don't know what a pay line is. And, you know, I used to not know what a pay line is. So now I try to describe what a pay line is to avoid losing people. Because once you lose someone, if you lose someone in the third sentence of your abstract, it's kind of over. I mean, it's hard to recover if you've lost someone, if they're not with your story. If you're watching a movie and you know, there's 15 minutes into the movie, some new character appears who makes no sense relative to anything else, and you're kind of lost, and they don't tie it back together pretty quickly, you might be kind of a lost audience member for that vignette. Okay, so then here's some other, I guess we have a few minutes left. So I'm just going to give other little tips for constructing papers. So I like to make a table for each paper that lays out the entire logic, right? So question, you can think of this as problem. Make columns: question, approach, result, and then the figure. And so each row is some sort of maybe an experimental asset or some question that you've answered through whatever means. And then these questions, flow down the page, and each figure panel somehow relates to a specific question, and it's sort of the dashboard for a whole paper. And so in several of our papers, we've put these. There's a really good one in this Nature paper. You can just find it from Sudoff. You can also email me, and I can send you several examples. But these tables, they also help the reviewer to stay oriented, because if it's just like a long list of words, like a paper and a bunch of figure panels, it's just kind of I don't know, discombobulated to be bouncing around and remembering what the logic was. And let's say the reviewer kind of gets halfway through, but then gets distracted by, they have to go to some committee meeting or something. By having a table where the entire paper is kind of held together in its logic and all in one place, it helps someone sort of pick things back up where they may have left off. So I'm encouraging everyone to actually do this at the very beginning, before you even write the paper. You make the table first, and then you kind of, once it looks right, once all the logic seems like it's connected, then you can write the paper around that. Some people make the figures, like, make me the figures, and then we'll write the paper around the figures. Well, that's fine, but the figures obviously need to be answering some sort of important question. Okay. Another trick we do during drafting and is that if you're writing your paper alone, it's hard to know whether someone else can understand your sentence or not. We all understand our own writing really well. So what we often do is we'll co-edit in a Google Doc. So we'll have two of us. That was, I don't know, someone whose initial was D, and that was me. And we get to some sentence, and we duplicate it, and then we both try to make it better, and we can see what each other is doing. We can steal words from each other, and then if we both come to some agreement that some version of it is understandable, then it's slightly more likely that a third person will find it understandable. And obviously, you can do this with 3 people, and then test it on a 4th person afterwards. But we're just kind of putting this sort of testing in multiple audiences and refinement to practice. I think I'm actually going to stop there. It's about the right time, and I don't want to further dilute with intensive discussions about how to word titles. And I think we'll just proceed to the Q&A. Medina, do I just unshare or something?
All right. Thank you. That was really great. I've seen versions of that at different departments when you've come to speak. I've read the paper, but I feel like I get a little more each time. Like this thing you pointed out about testing on a naive population. Well, I wonder where you find the 10-year-old you use to test. No, just kidding. No, that's great. I mean, I test my texts with lab members, but they're absolutely not the naive population. They already know the jargon. They don't even tag it as jargon in many cases. So that's great to hear. So while people add, we have a couple of great questions, but while others sort of add their questions to the list, I have a few to start. So in experimental neuroscience, so I'm sort of somewhere in between experimental systems neuroscience and computational neuroscience. As you know, this summer school, and so most of the audience is more in the computational neuroscience camp. And so a lot of our papers have a good, hefty theory section. The method section really requires a lot of technical details that are critical to understanding the paper. And there, it seems harder to give a nice narrative the way you pointed out. In experimental neuroscience, this seems easier. But it also just seems really important for those papers too. So I wonder if you could just give a little guidance on that.
Okay, yeah. So the logic of everything has to hang together at a course scale, and then you may have to drill down from there and then return back to that course scale. Like imagine a geometry proof that has sort of 5 steps, and one of the steps is some postulate that the professor wants you to actually go back and prove that postulate from scratch. You might get to step 3 and say, okay, now we're going to drill down into that and show that how tall an equilateral triangle is, and then you go through that proof, and then you come back. Okay, now that we've shown that, let's proceed with where we are on that level. So keeping mapping out the hierarchy. I mean, presumably it must all be linked in some hierarchy. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so using kind of in narrative sort of linkage words to show where you are in that hierarchy, and then the paragraphing, right? Like a paragraph could be a drill down, and then the last sentence of the paragraph is, okay, so here, thus we've shown this thing. And then the first sentence of the next paragraph is back to the next level of the hierarchy that you jump down into.
I see. So if you set up the hierarchy correctly, there can be sort of a bookmarked technical section in the middle, but it should be enough, there should be enough padding to sort of have the whole thing still fit into a narrative and allow you to go into technical detail.
Right. And if possible, you could even make a kind of a hierarchical diagram. Just say, box 1, and then you give the diagram. Here's how the elements relate to each other, and then they're all described in some detail in different sections. And so it's like a map. Because again, if it's just a list of words, there's something, you're really depending on the person's attention and working memory, and so it's nice to just kind of all have it mapped if possible. And usually it is possible, but hard.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, well, I have a few more questions, but we should probably go to the audience submitted ones. So let's start with the top one. How much time and or resources should a scientist spend on visuals, graphics, etc.? In other professions such as journalism, it's common practice to outsource this in order to focus on the core. But it's true, and I agree, this is often not the case in science communication. Many papers suffer from poor or no visuals at all that explain the concepts. And they're asking for your advice here. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a huge fan of graphics and summary diagrams. So in the grants that we work on, the apps, there's not enough room on the Ames page to put graphics because every word is very valuable, every little space. But then on the first page of the rest of the grant, the research strategy, we always have a summary diagram that is more or less the graphical abstract of the grant. And we have on our team a really good, two really good graphic designers, and I really like to have it all summarized visually. And even during the production of the grant, we work on that because it forces an austerity of concept, because that diagram can't be too busy. It has to really reduce. What is the pitch of this grant? What is this grant solving? What's the smallest number of elements that I can put in this diagram that communicate by itself without even a caption what this grant is solving. And one of my really great editors is less visual than I am, and she doesn't really like those diagrams because she can just read it and it all makes sense to her because she's really smart that way. But different people some people are more visual than others, so I like to provide the two different ways, like the Ames page way, which is just words, and the graphical way to reach different kinds of reviewers' minds. So I really I love those graphics.
Yeah, I agree. And there's a sort of new software website community called BioRender. Do you know about these guys? So
they're great.
Yeah, they provide a vector library of science, sometimes neuroscience specific graphics. That's great. And I have a related question. Where I've heard two different camps' opinion on this. Where do you stand on figure captions? So should you be able to sort of produce the figure entirely from the captions, or do they assist each other?
So I actually, I subscribe to the IKEA theory of figures. I want figures to look like IKEA instructions, where you don't really even actually need. I mean, people use captions and legends kind of interchangeably, but you mean like the 5 or 6 lines of text under the figure? Yeah, I don't want to have to read that at all. I don't like to have to, saccade and keep things in working memory. I don't know. I'm not a very good primate, but I just want it all to be visually evident on the figure. I want it to be like IKEA instructions. I mean, I love IKEA instructions. I'm not gonna, I'm not embarrassed about that. And so there's, I want to like, if there's 5 different lines, I want, so the what each line is just written right on the line. I don't want to have to read, oh, the yellow line means this, okay, and then they're not even in the same order as the lines in the graph. Like, I don't want to do that. I don't know. It's probably, so yeah, I want it to all be, but sure, the figure legend has to contain maybe details. But you want to get as much information just graphically. And there's those Tufty books that I recommend. I think someone's giving a talk on this in NMA. I do a talk on figures when I go do workshops, just trying to get it all, as IKEA as possible.
Tufty books? What was that?
Yeah, this author, Tufte, right on me, envisioning information. Okay. They're kind of big, thick books, and every department should have.
Oh, I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
Edward Tufte, and he goes around and gives like full day seminar. He's kind of the go-to on that. Beautiful books.
I see those ads on Facebook.
Yeah,
those are good targeted ads. Okay, let's go to the next one. Lots of great questions. I'm going to skip over some of our own and ask one. So Mohammed Abdelhak, that's a great last name, is asking how to balance ease of comprehension and formal language. So back to your jargon issue. Right.
So, this is a serious issue. So there is this belief, especially like in the physics community, which probably kind of infects this community a little bit, where like if everyone in the room can understand your talk, it's because you're not smart enough. Which I just find like, mind blowing. Because I was working with this one client, I remember it was like 6 years ago, and he was so smart and his work was amazing, but he just wanted to make it all, complicated to make it, I don't know, somehow impressive. And like after like hours of just getting it to where, it was 10-year-old level, at the end he goes, oh yeah, that is better. I get it. We should write it so that anyone can understand it. I'm like, yes, you got it. So yeah, I mean, sure, there are things that are too deep to get the broadest audience into, right? And again, it depends on if you're only writing it for like a very specialized audience, then you can just use words that they'll understand, and not everyone has to. I mean, not everything has to be for a broad audience, right? So I mean, if it's a Cell Nature or Science paper, you want someone completely. If you're writing a chemistry paper, you want a biologist to be able to understand the abstract at least. That's what those journals are about. And then the more specialty the journal, the more you can kind of assume maybe people know stuff. But
so are you saying, for instance, if there's a particular mouse knockout with a long specific name, if you're targeting for a broad journal with a wide audience, you should sort of use that as few times as you can, and otherwise replace with relevant layman words?
Or define it. You can define it in context, okay. Right? You can say, a gene whose absence makes you, right, grow an arm on your forehead, yeah. Whatever it's called.
Okay, great. Let's. We have lots of questions now, so I'll try to be briefer. What's the best way to communicate the logical argument in a paper, and in which section of the paper should that be done? This is from Gunnar Blom, one of our NMA people. So, I mean, I think that table that I was talking about
we didn't have time to go through one in detail, but that table, the relationship among the rows, right? The problem, and then what the answer is, and then what question that implies next. That table should actually have it. Now, that table it's a table, right? So it doesn't have complex hierarchical relationships. So if it's something that you really want to get that across, you can actually just make, again, as we talked about before, a map of the logic of the paper. You don't want to get too heavy with this kind of stuff. So ideally, you can get it into that table and maybe just have the arrows not be so rigid like the one that I showed. You can have the arrow sort of, this problem, in order to address this problem, we have to show that first we know how to measure this, that we know it's, these 4 things have to be in place. And so you could have the arrows connect those rows in a way that shows, the 4 things that have to happen to then support even being able to ask the question on row 5, for example. But and you'll start to see these tables more and more in papers, at least hopefully the ones I'm working on. I don't know if that helps.
So kind of sounds like there should be a little bit of the overall logical flow in every section.
So okay. So this is just the graphical aspect of it.
Yeah.
So that just gets implemented in the kind of the draft, the connection going through the paper. Introduction, results, conclusion, like the results section, right? The language, especially the first sentence and last sentence of every paragraph, and how the paragraphs are laid out, they just execute that logical structure. And then the middles of the paragraphs substantiate the first and last sentences. The first and last sentences kind of hold the structure relative to each other, and pay special attention to your conjunctions and these sort of connector words, because those are the logical connectors, and people often just kind of toss those in. And I'll be reading a draft. I'll be like, consequently, how is that consequently? And they'll say, oh, I didn't really mean consequently. I just kind of,
Yeah. It doesn't create consequence, right?
Okay. Right. Every single word needs to be scrutinized, especially conjunctions and these logical connectors, right? After all, we're supposed to be a logical, society here.
And conjunctions are things you just said, consequently, therefore, things like that.
Yeah. And versus but. Nevertheless, or any, things like that.
Okay. Great. All right, let's go to the next one. This is my friend, Ben Huang. He's asking what would be a good way to write about controversial topics, writing to challenge or change people's prior models.
I'm going to do one thing that you said I was allowed to do. Ines Vaz, is the table a supplementary figure in the paper or just for the reviewers? So I like it to be a supplementary figure in the paper, as I showed, but also we just use it during the entire production of the paper as a guide for ourselves. And we can always take it out if we want, but yeah, it stays in. So sorry, I wanted to exercise that. So say it. So please repeat your.
Sure. No, thank you for answering that. Actually, I kind of had the same question. What would be a good way to write about controversial topics when you're writing to challenge or change people's prior models? This is a more general writing question.
Yeah, so we struggle with this a lot. Right. No short answer. It's the most painful aspect of. I mean, if you look through, you'll see I worked on some very iconoclastic type stuff, especially when it comes to dopamine. Yeah, it's hard. So. I don't know if I can give a nice canned answer, because a lot of it is not taking it head on. A lot of it is basic diplomacy, acknowledging the aspects of the canon that are kind of well-intended or even valid, but the aspects of the canon that are not exactly tested. But yeah, that's a great question, and I cannot provide an all-purpose answer to it.
I think that's fair enough. Next question. Oh, and this is a great question. Yang is asking how to decide which journals to go for, if the answer is to ask the PI or people in the field, or how do you generally decide?
Right. So, well, that comes to sort of breadth of audience, right? Who will benefit from this? Who will be interested in it, right? So it comes down to kind of, is it a specialist audience or a general audience? In this, I guess I didn't really get to this either. Kind of the significance of the work relates to how it's going to change the world, which relates to when people learn about this, how are they going to use this to then do the next thing, to ultimately produce, right? It's about how it changes the future. So if you think about, okay, who's actually going to take this and do the next steps, right? Let's say you made some new, great calcium dye that is mostly for use by, neuroscientists studying, neuronal activity. That probably could go into a journal that neuroscientists look at, right? Whereas it might not need to be in the broad audience because, plant biologists may or may not want to use that tomorrow. But yeah, so it's who's gonna take this and turn it into something. And we just go. I mean, practically though, we just go for the best journal we think it could possibly get into. So that's how it actually goes down.
Great. Okay, I think we can take one more question, and I like this question, especially given that Neuromatch Academy is really a global school. So this is Alex is asking this question. More big picture, in terms of equality of opportunity, isn't it a bit unfair that almost everything is published in English? So non-native speakers are disadvantaged. It is more difficult to be expressive and write well in a non-native language. So I guess the question is it fair? And your answer is yeah.
I mean, yeah, some people are great at, different. I'm very slow at learning any other language personally. I mean, there's no question that that's a huge factor. I don't know if there's a universal, maybe, yeah. I mean, like I guess mathematical proofs are, don't have so much.
Yeah.
So the extent to which you can turn it into some, hierarchy, a graphical hierarchy, but there's still going to be words in it. Yeah, I mean, if I was better at languages, maybe I would have a solution for that.
Yeah, and I mean, some of, at Neuromatch, we're sort of trying to contribute to that a little bit. We have these lecture videos, and there's a giant team that's captioning them and translating the captions. Like you said, your 10 simple rules paper, that's been translated into several languages. So, there's some sort of unified effort to get away from English dominancy, but it's hard.
It's also part of the broader topic of just getting feedback from people, because you can also get feedback on that part of it, right? So some of the people who come to us to ask for us to help with their drafts and things are native English speakers, and some are not. And to be honest, there's problems at all levels, whether it be language or just logic, or there's plenty of, yeah. So it's kind of just in a way one more problem, and you just need another layer of help. Like if you're trying to publish in a language that isn't your native language, you might need to kind of have someone who is bilingual helping you get through that process. And that's why I really just encourage anyone with any kind of talent, especially bilingual people, to just go into this. And it's I feel like the world is on fire regarding us understanding each other, and so everyone needs help.
Agreed. And okay, so we are out of time. There's a lot of questions left. People seem very engaged in the conversation. But as closing remarks, and of course, please add your own, but I wonder if you could give some advice on this. So we're all in this new pandemic situation with lab closures across much of the country, much of the world. It's changing the way many of us do our science. I haven't seen any explicit changes in publishing yet, really, aside from the fact that it's harder to find reviewers because everyone's busy. So I just wonder if you have any sort of ideal scenarios in mind. We're all at home. We have extra time away from the lab. That doesn't mean we have extra time, but do you wish we can use this pandemic opportunity to change the way we write papers in any particular way?
Yeah, I think that given that we can't do experiments in the lab as much as we used to, it's a good time to put more effort into this and iterate through other people looking at your drafts. As you put more effort into it, you realize how much worse the situation is than you may have ever thought. Like just even what is the meaning of this word that I've been taking for granted, that everyone understands what I mean by behavior or by vigor or whatever, and really just breaking it out and just putting effort into understanding how many ways other people can misunderstand what you're saying, because there's more time for that now. Of course, there's less time because of other issues we have to deal with. But yeah, I think we've been a lot busier because everyone's doing papers and grants now because they can't do experiments, some of them. So yeah, I think it's a good time to become more and more involved in improving this aspect of what we're all trying to do, and maybe even develop. I mean, there's a lot of potentially innovative solutions for besides just making your drafts better. If anyone wants to work on this, email me. I have several sort of sub projects that could possibly help the whole community rather than just one paper at a time.
Great. Okay, and
some smart programmer people.
We're a huge community of programmers and people getting way better at programming rapidly. We can send out your slides later, right? Or some modified version of them, and that has your contact info. Great.
Yeah, sure.
We'll get that up to people. Okay. Yeah. Thank you so much. Thanks to the audience. This was a fun hour. Brett, unless you have any closing remarks, we can end the session.
Yeah. Thanks for all your time.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Bye.